Internet comments. What you know what? Just to be safe. Thing you did ended up saving your ass later? Make a difference today and help this channel reach 100 subscribers. Also comment below your own just to be safe story below. I've written about this before, but here goes. 4 students of mine won the first prize for a project they did, and we all got a free trip to London. We had spent the day sightseeing and were exhausted, so we got an ice cream and sat on a bench in a park to relax. A couple of minutes later I noticed this couple walk by slowly, staring at us. My spidey senses go mental. I do not like these people for some reason. She walks by and sits on the bench next to ours, and he sits on the bench across from hers. They aren't talking, just looking at each other. And that is when I notice her reaching into her pockets. I jump up, grab my students and run out of the park. My poor students are confused AF and wondering WTF is wrong with me, when all of a sudden we hear screaming. Turns out she stabbed a couple walking through the park, trying to rob them. It scares the ever-loving fuck out of me knowing, had I not gotten my students out of there, we would have been stabbed and robbed. Was remodeling my house, took out a loan, and had to get the house appraised to get the loan. Found that my house was worth 100k more than I had it insured for. Raised my limits on the home insurance to 50k more than the appraised value in anticipation of completing renovations. 2 weeks later house burned to the ground due to a faulty bathroom fan that I did not touch. City, insurance company and loan company all sent separate investigators due to how shady it looked. A tropical storm was blowing through my city a few months ago, and we were projected to get some wind gusts and significant rain. Because our parking lot isn't large enough for all staff and our clients, a lot of us have to park on the street, which is lined with large old trees. As I rolled up on the morning we were due to get the storm, I parked in my usual spot down the block. Before I shut the car off, though, I noticed that this particular spot was located directly across the street from one of the largest trees on the block. Thinking, you know what, just to be safe, I put the car in reverse and backed up about 10 feet, safely out of the direct line of fire from any trees. In the middle of that afternoon, in the midst of the howling wind and driving rain, we heard a huge thud down the street. Went to investigate, and that same tree I'd been parked across the street from fell across the road and missed my car by about 8 feet. At that moment, I was glad that I'd decided to play it safe. The car parked on the other side of the street directly across from where I'd initially been got absolutely destroyed. Crushed roof, windows blown out, just pulverized. I had a car sitting on jack stands because I needed to do some transmission work. Before climbing under it, I thought it'd be a good idea to rock the car around. One of the jack stands was not in the right spot and the car slipped off it, slamming down on the front disc brakes. Would have killed me. One of my coworkers died earlier this year from this very thing. You were good to check. Last year this happened to my father with the front wheels off. The truck came down dead center on his chest, but he was able to crawl out somehow and walk into the house to tell my mother he needs to go to the ER. My father is one of the toughest guys I've ever met, but he was crying in pain when they made him lift his arms above his head for the X-ray. He ended up with 5 broken ribs and dislocated shoulder from prying himself free. Could have been so much worse if he was only an inch or 2 closer to the front. I took one of those extra driving classes you always hear about to get the discount on your car insurance. I was in college and my premium was killing me. The one I signed up for was an 8-hour course that I knocked out in one day, and the focus was maintaining control of your vehicle in bad weather. I took it over spring break, which is still a pretty snowy/icy time of year around here. The big test at the end to determine if you got the certificate was to pass the moose test, though some places call it the elk test or the deer test. Either way, to pass the course you had to successfully swerve around some cones on an icy road and regain control of the car on the other side of the cones. So my first day back at school from spring break, I'm driving myself and my roommate from the liquor store back to our dorm in some shitty conditions. I try to turn left into our parking lot and my car just slides straight past it and down a hill. I try to turn the wheel right to get into a different parking lot and get closer, but not quite where I need it to be. I'm heading straight for a telephone pole. My roommate is panicking, but I looked at it and I realized this is just the moose test. I managed to swerve around the pole, narrowly missing a wall of parked cars next to it, and regained control on the other side, finally bringing my car to a stop in an empty section of the parking lot. Then we walked back to the dorm and drank our faces off. So the moral of the story is, those extra driving classes you might take for the insurance discount may just save your life. I was undergoing pilot training and was pretty new to the whole thing, feeling the pressure to perform, etc. I walked out to pre-flight a plane for a solo flight. You do this completely alone. Instructor was back at flying school doing something else. After doing my walk around, it's time to check the oil. Cessna 172s have a dipstick that is attached to a cap that screws into the engine. You unscrew cap and remove dipstick along with it and check the oil. Except, after I unscrew the cap, there doesn't seem to be a dipstick attached to it. I have this thought, well, the engine is still warm from the dudes who just flew before me, so they flew it like this. Maybe they had a separate dipstick? They must have checked the oil then some other way. Then I have the well. To be safe, I should actually pack this up and go ask someone at the flight school exactly how to check the oil in this case. Note, this takes quite a chunk of time out of my supposed flight and will cut my lesson for the day short by quite a margin, but I do it anyway. Long story short, info gleaned from subsequent investigations, the dipstick had broken off during the previous flight that had landed just minutes before and had slid straight into the engine, where the crankcase had been chomping away metal from the tip, that metal now circulating in the engine. The aircraft was grounded, it was extremely dangerous to fly, and at massive cost had to be stripped down, the entire engine disassembled, and they actually had to find every bit of metal missing from the dipstick and reassemble the dipstick before plane could be reassembled and made flight worthy again. If, in a moment of stupidity, I'd taken off in that plane, I'd probably be dead. I was 19 and home for the summer from college. I had a contraband bottle of Bacardi stashed in my bedroom under a pile of clothes and other stuff between my bed and the window. My grandfather appears in a dream and sits me down with this bottle to chew me out, not for having booze as a kid, but for hiding it so poorly. I wake up, a bit disturbed by this dream, and throw the bottle of Bacardi in a duffel bag and toss that in the trunk of my car as I leave for work. Get home that evening, and the pile it had been stashed under was moved as my mom had set up a table with a fan by the window to get air moving. Grew up in northern we without AC. Wouldn't have been a fun rest of the summer had I been busted with that. I was out solo hiking / camping. It was the end of a long day and I really didn't feel like taking the time to tie up a bear bag with all your food tied up in a tree far away from your camp. I said, you know what, just to be safe, I'll go set one up. Cut to the middle of the night, I'm woken up to the sound of a black bear walking 30 feet away from my hammock and heading straight to where I tied up my food. My mother's coworker convinced her to get the best possible insurance when pregnant because this coworker had kids deprived of oxygen at birth. She said she could lower it once the kids were 5 and seemed normal. It was a struggle as my parents were both in college and working while raising my brother, so they were looking to cut costs wherever possible. I ended up being born with a birth defect that required a transplant before 5. Before the new doctor even told her what was wrong, after rushing me away via ambulance, they asked her if she had insurance. She was able to say, yes, gold star, platinum, whatever. Many kids died even with the top class care I received. So I surely wouldn't have made it without it. I'm turning 30 next year. Thanks, random lady I've never met. Before I knew always get it in writing, I was a senior in college and had a guidance counselor who was completely inept. I had transferred to this school from 2 separate ones and didn't know if my credits would come over 1:1. He told me they would, and we talked about everything I needed to do before I graduated the following semester. When I got home, something told me to send him a breakdown of what we had talked about and just get him to confirm it was all correct. I was minoring in English and my major was in a field somewhat related, so I had to go to the English department to have them look at my transcripts and sign off that everything was in order. This counselor told me that none of my credits from one of the schools I went to would come over. We went back and forth, me telling him it would, him saying adamantly that it wouldn't. He wouldn't sign off on anything and told me I had to retake those classes. I pulled up the email and said that my other counselor confirmed that it would, and I had met all the requirements for graduation from his department, and because of that, I didn't have to take an extra semester filled with classes that I've already taken. Thanks for watching. Make a difference today and help this channel reach 100 subscribers. Also comment below your own just to be safe story below.